what I'm hoping to do today is to finish up the evolution and then maybe spend a little bit of time on one of my favorite topics that really isn't addressed in the book, but which was really instrumental in me removing a bump in my faith that ultimately led to the road of Christ. And it's kind of a nerdy sort of thing. And the question is, where is God? The thing that I specialize in is evolution on a computer. Oh, that's Pre-Coffee Man. That's your second cartoon.
Pre-Coffee Man.
Yeah, that's supposed to be a joke.
Yeah.
Okay. This model of Darwinian evolution was so compelling. We had all of these different steps. We had a generation. That generation had survival of the fittest. And after the survival of the fittest, there was a mutation, and then there was another generation, and it just repeated. And that was the basic idea of evolution. There's finer grained steps in here, but that was the basic idea. The problem is it just took too long to test, to go into the biology lab and to test it. So therefore, the people, when computers came out, people said, hey, now we can do this on a computer, and we can really show that we can model evolution, and then we can try it on a computer, and we can show that Darwinian evolution works. And so here's a quote from 1967, a guy talking about this great hope that they had with the computer to actually prove and demonstrate that evolution was actually true. I was actually in a society and was administratively involved in the finding of the IEEE transactions on evolutionary computing. Turns out engineers use evolutionary computing to solve problems. This comes out, I believe, every month, and it has different papers in use of evolutionary computing. Here was one of the kind of cool successes. There used to be this thing called a Yagi-Yuda antenna. You've seen these antennas. They used to be on rooftops, like in third world countries. You can still go see them, and they're all over the rooftops everywhere.
We use that in other news.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's still there. So NASA people wanted to design something which was better. So what they did is they created a model, a parameterized model, which I'll explain to you in a bit. They established a measure of the design's fitness. In other words, how well did this designed antenna grab signals from outer space, or from the air, or wherever it was. And then they searched the ND space using evolutionary computing. Basically what they did is they tried a bunch of solutions, they kept the fittest, they killed off the ones that weren't working too good, they duplicated the fit ones, they mutated that, and then repeated the process again and again and again on a computer. And they ended up with this antenna here, which always looked to me like kind of a paperclip stuff, a piece of cork, yeah. But it turned out to work really good, and it turns out it's flying around space right now. So that's what engineers do in terms of evolutionary computing. However, there's a couple of things that are important to recognize here. One was every time an engineer uses evolution, it's teleological. It has a goal in mind. The biologists say, we don't have goals in mind. They would just say it's survival of the fittest, whatever it is. There is really no goal in mind for the evolutionary process. And the other thing is this was generated by a computer program written by a person, right? So those are two things to remember. You know what they did here? They took this thing and they said, okay, I can have bends at certain lengths of the wires. And they could have actually gone through and looked at all the bends and all the angles of all the bends and come up with the best solution. They could have done that. So on the other side, the people in biology began to publish works on evolution. This is evolution, and here is a model of evolution, kind of fulfilling this prophecy from 1967 when they were going to try it. And here is one, evolution of biological information. Now, it turns out that as an engineer, I knew that all of the works and evolutionary programs that engineers did had a goal in mind. They were intelligently designed. Plus, they didn't have the ability to evolve beyond what they were told to do. I think I mentioned this last week, but I was sitting in my office writing a program one time And I had a colleague come in, Randall Jean. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing an evolutionary program." He said, "Oh, that is so cool. When am I going to be able to talk to it?" And he said it, and he knew it was funny because that evolutionary program did exactly what I told it it was going to do and reached the goal that I had set for it. It was just the evolutionary process in the middle. So we knew this, and we knew that information had to be put into these programs. And along with William Dembski, we developed a model where we could actually show the amount of information that was infused into the evolutionary process. These guys, they were doing things that could not be done by blind search. Remember blind search? They would look at a solution, say, "Is that it? No. Is that it? No. Is that it? No. Is that it? No." They had to put in some experiment or some information to show that one model would be better than another one. And we were able to measure that in bits. So we took this very popular model of evolution, we debunked it, along with a couple of graduate students, Winston Ewart and George Montañez, and actually showed where this extra information was coming from in the program, the sources of the information that they used to guide it, and we were able to measure it in bits and show, no, evolutionary computing was not creating any information, but the information was already stuck in the program. There's a second one, Avida, that has a bigger consequence. It was written to show how complex biological functions can originate by random mutations and natural selection. See, the Darwinists say that we can get people from cells, but that's a lot of information. That's a lot of increase in complexity, in things of that sort. And they were trying to show this. Now, what happened was that there was a trial in Dover, and it ended in 2006. And what happened was that the Dover School Board, as I remember, decided they wanted to put little stickers on all their biology books saying something very benign, that there were theories other than what was presented in the book. And that was it. They didn't even talk about intelligent design. Again, this trial that came where the ACLU challenged the Dover Board of Education that they were teaching religion in school. Now, in all the stuff that we've talked about here, you see very much religion? I'm very open about Christianity in this, but the facts, they stand by themselves. There's really no religion. So there was a lengthy trial, and it turns out that Judge Jones was in the pocket of the ACLU and actually took one of the ACLU briefs and actually used it with some modification for his final opinion, saying that intelligent design, what we're studying here, is a religion, which was very unfortunate. One of the testimonies at that trial was Robert Pinnock. Now, Robert Pinnock was one of the authors of this paper on Avida, and he was saying how in computers they were able to develop evolution and show evolution. And he said, by this, he said, in the Avida system, we're not just simulating evolution. Evolution is actually happening. However, the Avida program suffered from all of the different problems that the other evolutionary programs showed. Specifically, they had specific goals. They actually laid out the track by which you would achieve this more complex goal. They did it in the program, and we were able to analyze it, and with Winston Ewart, actually debunk this. Now, this was way after the trial. This was in, I guess, 2009, it looks like. So it was 3 years after the trial. But indeed, if this trial comes up again and the authors of Avida, or indeed any computer simulated program of biological evolution is proposed, I think that we can safely debunk it if it does come up. So, Darwinian evolution cannot be creative without an intelligent design. I love this statement by Charles Darwin because I really think that the mathematics and the computer modeling of Darwinian evolution, as we know it, has really debunked the theory. Charles Darwin actually says every new body of discovery is mathematical in form because there is no other guidance we can have. His generation of the Darwinian model was totally void of mathematics. And he just said, well, this sounds like a good idea. And deeper in the mathematics we get, the more we see that it doesn't work. Gregory Chaitin, who is a brilliant man, I wish I had time just to go into some of the stuff that he's done. The honor of mathematics requires us to come up with a mathematical theory of evolution and either prove that Darwin was right or wrong. So I wanted to talk about something else, with your permission. Okay, can anybody read the Greek? But when they're translated, I don't know what that means.
Theos.
I think it says, where is God? Something like that.
It says, God ever geometrizes.
Well, that's what I meant.
I got the God. That was all I got.
God ever geometrizes. In other words, it was actually first stated, I believe, by Plato, who said there is mathematics resident in our creation so much that God is just kind of a mathematician. I used to call this mathematical apologetics, but I've decided that blows people away. So I want to do where is God. And what is cool is I took a course when I was a sophomore in high school, about, a year before I came to Christ, in which my eyes were opened about the existence of God. So this is kind of an apologetics which is related to nerds, if you will. So, okay, you got that? Okay, good. Now there's been a number of proofs of God. Anselm's ontological argument. Has anybody ever heard of that? It's just, I won't even go through it, but he basically had a wonderful preamble to it, which I want to refer to later, which is that God is greater than anything we can imagine. Now, Kurt Gödel, maybe one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. And when he died, they discovered a proof of God that he had. And this is his proof of God. You ready? Okay, you got it?
No problem.
No problem.
That last line I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah, I know. But what is cool is you can print this out and somebody says, prove God. You can always just hand them this and say, well, here's the proof. If you have any questions, come in, let's talk about it. Okay? So that was his proof of God using Anselm's ontological argument. Okay, you got it. Now here's the book that I read that really gave me pause. It was about Flatland. It was a romance of many dimensions. Has anybody ever read Flatland or heard about it? It's a story. It was written in, many years ago. On the left is the original cover, by a guy named Edwin Abbott, and he was kind of an apologist of sorts. And I don't know if he had any theological motivation for writing Flatland, but it began really, really interesting. It was the story about life on two dimensions. So imagine this coffee table here, just the top of it. All life forms existed here. They had no height. They were all just zero height, and that was their universe. That's all they did on Flatland. And they moved around. There was some actual political commentary that he did also. And there was a guy living on Flatland. Everybody on Flatland now would be a geometrical object, right? It'd be a two-dimensional object. And this one guy on Flatland went to something that existed in Flatland, which was called lineland. And these line lands, he was an organism that lived in this flatland, and these line segments moved back and forth. They were all entities, and they were talking to each other. And the thing he noticed was that nobody in Lineland knew he was there, because for Lineland, the line was their universe. That's all they knew. That's all they knew. And so he began looking at that and said, isn't that interesting that there is this universe on a line that doesn't recognize anything in two dimensions where I live? And then he also looked at so-called point land, which is kind of cool, because point land, that was his entire universe. And he thought everything he experienced was due to him. So if somebody said, "Hey, what's happening, Point Land?" he said, "Oh, I'm so cool. I thought that up all by myself." So he took credit for everything. So this two-dimensional creature, which was named A square, A was his first initial, and then square, he came up with this theory, and this theory was called up. And he said there is a third dimension. There is a dimension which exists outside of this two dimensions. Just like Lineland had the second dimension, there is also a third dimension, and that's up. And everybody said, okay, we'll point to it. Well, he was constrained to his two-dimensional universe, right? So the only thing that he could do is maybe point north. I've always wondered about when we point to heaven, that's kind of like pointing north in flatland, okay? So that's all they could do is point north. They say, come on, that's just pointing north. I want to see what up is. So it turns out that during this time there was a little sphere, and the sphere was actually hovering above the land, and he was listening to this guy's lecture. One of the implications is that this sphere could actually see inside of people. So he could see if this guy ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, because he could look inside the guy and see the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, where nobody else could see that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They could just see the surface of it. And he was so impressed with the square, A square, that he came down and he said he actually intersected the sphere so he could communicate with him. And he said, you know what? He says, you're right. There is such thing as up. And I'm going to show it to you if you want to see it. And the square said, okay, I'd like to see it. So the square felt this really weird feeling inside where the sphere was coming down and just touching him and pulling him off the plane into a three-dimensional universe. And what was incredible is that the view that the square had was just astounding. He could not only see inside of people, he could see inside of houses. If you think the houses then were just kind of squares with a little door here, he was hovering above the houses. He could see inside the houses and see things that were happening. And he said, this is really, really incredible. He said, let's do something. He said, I have a request. This is so amazing that we can see the third dimension. He said, show me the fourth dimension. I want to see the next dimension. And the sphere said, that doesn't exist. Fourth dimension doesn't exist. So, that got me to thinking about fourth dimensions. Now, it turns out in science fiction they've been playing around with dimensions for a lot. The Invisible Man, they said, I have found a general principle to formulate a geometric expression involving four dimensions. So the man was invisible in H.G. Wells' story because he would have had access to a fourth dimension. And then there was another one called The Wonderful Visit, wherein H.G. Wells said there may be a number of three-dimensional universes packed side by side. This is what the string theorists today are saying. So H.G. Wells was kind of interested in that. It's also been in the cinema. Now in the cinema, if you remember Superman the movie, there was General Zod and all of his bad people, and they were put on trial by Jor-El, who I think Zor.
It's on the album cover. It floated into space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now what they did is they were banished to be punished by taking a three-dimensional existence and going to two dimensions. That was their punishment. And that was the so-called phantom zone. And are you ready for a little clip here?
You will lie down before me, Jor-El! Both you and them one day, Jor-El!
Okay, so that was the clip. There was also one in the Twilight Zone called Little Girl Lost. The story is these parents woke up and they heard their daughter saying, Mommy, Mommy. And they went into her bedroom and she wasn't there. They looked all around the house and they couldn't find her. But they were still hearing Mommy, Mommy. After they had explored everything and even looked between the walls. They called who you called when you have an emergency of this type. They called a physicist. Right? So they called this physicist, and this physicist came over and determined that this little girl had fallen off her bed and gone into another dimension, gone into the fourth dimension. So this was the Twilight Zone episode. This is overacting too.
What is it? The opening.
To what?
I think. To another dimension.
What did he say?
He said, I think to another dimension. I mean, it's almost corny there.
I think.
I like the parent's face.
To another dimension.
Exactly.
That Bible looked like a fish with his mouth.
He did, yeah, exactly. And so they go in. It turns out that one guy holds the other guy by the feet, and just to make you feel good, they went into the dimension, and they got the little girl out. So, yeah, they yanked her back out through the thing. Now, all of this was kind of in science fiction for a long while until the string theorists came along. And it turned out in order to make their theory work, they had to resort to something called string theory. And these strings have 11 or 26 dimensions, and some of them are compactified. I think I explained this before, but the idea is you have 2 dimensions, and if you take those 2 dimensions and you scroll them up and you go far enough back, it looks like 1 dimension. So that's what happens in these strings, which are just so incredibly small that there are 11 or 26 dimensions.
Either 11 or 26.
Yes, it turns nothing in between. This is according to Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. I haven't kept up with the other things, but it turned out that they had to assume this in order to make the math work. So, and I don't understand about the specific things. And all of a sudden, as people began to discover and talk about the creation of the universe, it turned out that our choice of 3 dimensions was actually part of the Big Bang. That we could have had 4 dimensions, 2 dimensions, or 7 dimensions. That was determined during the Big Bang. In fact, Stephen Hawking talks about this in his book, A Brief History of Time. He said, boy, this is an anthropic principle. The idea that we have 2 dimensions, he says, think of what would happen if we only had 2 dimensions. Now, this is supposedly one of the greatest physicists alive today. He says, think of a dog. If we had a dog, and think of the digestive tract, it has to go through the mouth and then exit in that long tube. He said if we had 2 dimensions, that wouldn't work. In 3 dimensions, we can put a tube through a solid. But in 2 dimensions, it wouldn't work because that means that the dog would be separated, right? So, therefore, that's good that we have 3 dimensions because if we had a big bang and there was only 2 dimensions, we couldn't digest, I suppose. I always thought that was very naive because I could always see us being held together by magnets or something like that. There's other alternatives there. Now, here are some of the I think, just fascinating implications of going from 2 to 3D. And this is what we can do. We can actually go from 2 to 3D, and then from this idea, we can actually extrapolate and find out what would happen in 4 and 5 dimensions. Now, in this case, we have righties in flatland. All of these prints are right-handed palms, right? And no matter where you go in flatland, the thumb is going to be to the left of the fingers. There's nothing you can do about it, right? So therefore, if you're right-handed, if it's a right palm print, you are always going to be a right palm print. However, if you had access to a 3rd dimension, you could take a palm print, flip it over, and make it into a left-handed, couldn't you? If you had access to that 3rd dimension. It has incredible implications in baseball if there was a 4th dimension. Because what we could do is we could take a left-handed hitter, and if we had a 4th dimension, we could take this person in 4th dimension flip them around, and make them a right-handed hitter. Exactly the same way that we took the hand and flipped it around. Isn't that cool? Now, here's another thing which is interesting. Suppose that we had a chain, and by this chain I mean in flatland, in 2 dimensions. So there was just this little hook, and this little hook couldn't separate from the surrounding results. That'd be a 2-dimensional chain, right? That you could drag along the table. But if you had the 3rd dimension, of course, you could take it out and undo it, right? Same thing happens in 3 dimensions. If we have a 3-dimensional chain, if we could flip it into 4 dimensions, you've seen that. You could flip it into 4 dimensions and actually have it come back separated. Now, just assume for a minute that we could do that. Is there any place where you know about chains falling apart? The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Now, the question, could this have been the explanation of the miracle? Yes, it could have. Is it? I don't know. It's just an interesting speculation. But again, if there was access to the 4th dimension, dissolving and taking off interlocking chains would be no problem.
See, I always felt like that was talking about that the chains broke. That it would be a greater miracle if all the chain links were intact.
Well, it just said the chains fell off Peter's wrists.
Yeah.
So I don't think it ever said broke. I don't believe so.
Right.
Yeah, it just fell off. There's another thing in flatland. If you had a guy living in flatland and they were put in a cell with 4 sides, if the guy was constrained to flatland, he would have to stay there. He couldn't get out.
How did he get in there in the first place?
They put him in and built a wall. But if you had access to 3 dimensions, it'd be easy to get him out, wouldn't it? Right? So how do we extrapolate that? This is from 2 to 3 dimensions. What can we extrapolate from 3 to 4 dimensions? People can go through walls. And of course, there was Christ doing that. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Now, again, I want to emphasize, could this be the explanation of the miracle? It could be. But is it the explanation of the miracle? Maybe. It's just speculation. But nevertheless, it's compelling, isn't it? It's very fascinating that these excesses of... There's a great, if you ever want to read about this, Hugh Ross, who is a cosmologist, great Christian guy, wrote a book called The Creator and the Cosmos. With the higher dimensions, let's talk about the existence of God. Could God be in the 4th dimension? Well, if we go back to Anselm's ontological argument, God is greater than anything we can imagine. Why not the 5th dimension? Why not the billionth dimension? Why not an unimaginably large dimension? Now, if God does exist in these higher dimensions, what does this mean? Just like the plane, he could be infinitely close to us and really not even intersect our universe. Just like the sphere was very close to the plane. God could be there and right next to us and not intersect our universe. Of course, he can intersect our universe, which we believe he did with Christ, right? He intersected our universe. He decided to become a part of it. He's able to intersect, and he's able to see inside things. He's able to see inside.
Read our thoughts.
Read our thoughts.
Know everything in the heart.
Know everything in the heart. And just like they could see inside the houses of Flatland, he can see inside here without actually being here. Yeah. And it does give an explanation, not of the truth, but of the possibility of certain miracles. Walking through walls, chains dropping. I can see ascension. I can see pointing to heaven, just like the guy in Flatland kind of pointed north when he was trying to talk about up, us pointing to up to talk about God in a higher dimension. Now, does God exist in a higher dimension? I don't know. But it certainly explains a lot to me intellectually. And I remember at the time when I was reading Flatland, of this just hitting me that there could be a supreme being in a higher dimension that had all of these attributes. And just because I was going around as my little agnostic atheist self then and say, well, where is God? I don't see him. I don't see him. Well, he need not be in our universe. He can actually be in one of these other universes. Isn't that cool? Okay, I'm going to blow your minds now. Your minds are already blown, right? This is why I think math is so incredible, because of the insight that it gives. The other one that I want to talk about really quick is how long is eternity, and what does infinity really mean? How long is eternity? You know, the hymn Amazing Grace, we have been there 2,000 years, bright shining as the sun, with no less days to send God's grace than when we first begun. Yeah, which is, if you think about it, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? We've been there for 10,000 years, just incredible. Well, first of all, there's the obligatory dictionary definition. People in math talk about a sideways 8 as infinity. That doesn't mean infinity in math. That means just growing bigger without bound. And no matter how big you get, you're not even close to infinity. You ever heard of the number Google, the 10 to the 100th power? That's really big. And 10 to the, what did we do last time, 244th power? Just these incredibly large numbers. They're not even close to infinity. Because you can always take these numbers and you can multiply them together, right? And get a bigger number. And you're not even close to infinity. But the sideways 8 means you're growing without bound. There was a guy named George Cantor, a Christian, who actually studied the actual infinity and properties of the infinity. Well, he thought his results were so profound that he sought audience with Pope Leo XIII. He wanted to explain to Pope Leo XIII the theological implications of his mathematics. So here's Cantor. He actually showed that some infinities were bigger than others. You've always heard that if you take infinity and you add 1, you still get infinity. Yeah, that's true. But there are infinities bigger than other infinities. Wow. And Cantor was actually able to show that. The number of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's an infinity. The number of points on the line from 0 to 1 is a bigger infinity. Cantor showed that. Whoa. David Hilbert said that Cantor's work was the finest product of mathematical genius. And one of the things that Cantor really showed is that the actual infinite doesn't exist in our universe. Infinity does not exist in our universe, manifest in any way. Because anytime you assume that there's an infinity in our universe, you come up with just strange results. And here was Hilbert's explanation. He had Hilbert's Hotel. And Hilbert's Hotel has an infinite number of rooms. And they're all full. And they're all numbered 1, 2, 3, so all the rooms are full. Somebody comes up and says, I want a room. You say, well, there's no vacancy. No, it's no problem. What you just do is you move guest 1 to room 2, guest 2 to room 3, guest 3 to room 4, right? Everybody goes up a room. Forever. And that leaves room 1 empty. And you can put that person in there. What happens if 10 new guests come? That's no problem. You just take the guy in room 1, put him in 11. The guy in room 2, put him in 12. And you free up the first 10 rooms. Here's the mind-blowing part. What if an infinite number of people come? You can say to everybody, just take whatever your room number is and double it. So 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, 3 goes to 6, 4 goes to 8. And what have you done? You freed up all of the odd rooms forever. And you can put those infinity people in all those rooms. Can you see how absurd the concept of infinity is? This illustrates it's really absurd. And this is what happens when we apply the idea of infinity to any problem. It just becomes absurd.
That figure in front of there are figure and then 0 rooms.
Aleph not.
Yeah, it's Aleph. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Aleph. Okay. That was the terminology that Cantor used for his infinities. And Aleph naught is the smallest infinity. And so Aleph 1 is a bigger infinity. William Lane Craig, if you want to read a great book, Time and Eternity, he's one of the greatest, maybe the greatest Christian apologist alive today, that he talks about it. I won't go through the details, but are there bigger infinities? Yes. If you have, again, the number of points corresponding to the number of integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a smaller infinity than the set of points on a line. And there's even a bigger one, which is the set of all scribbles. That's the next set of infinity. If you take the set of all different marks you can make on a plane, that turns out to be a bigger infinity than you had before. I know, it's mind-blowing. But then mathematically, you can always construct a larger infinity by taking the infinity and taking the set of all subsets of it, and that gives you a bigger infinity. So there is no biggest infinity. You can take infinity and whatever you think the biggest infinity is, take the set of all subsets of that, and you get a bigger infinity. And it goes on forever. He talked about tribes that were unable to count above 3. They would go 1, 2, 3, and then their minds were just blown. And they would always say many. 1, 2, 3, many. And in fact, some of the shepherds used to do that. Instead of counting their sheep, they would take stones and they would say, okay, that's 1 sheep, here's another sheep, here's another sheep, and take the stones where there was a 1-to-1 correspondence to it. That's actually how Cantor developed his mathematics of infinity. But you'll notice that maybe we're not too much smarter than that. We can comprehend 3 dimensions, but can't understand a 4th dimension, right? It's beyond our comprehension. So we're, in that sense, not a lot better than these guys that can only count to 3. That the number of points is a smaller infinity than the number of points, the number of counting numbers is smaller than the number of points on a line segment, is smaller than the number of scribbles. But no one has ever come up with a good explanation of Aleph 3. The first one is Aleph, not Aleph 1, Aleph 2. Aleph 2 is the number of scribbles. That's a bigger infinity. Can't comprehend above Aleph 2. There's just no way. We can construct it mathematically. And this is where he thought he saw some theological implications. Pope Leo XIII, anybody know about the encyclical Petrus? It was basically a statement that said that the church needed to get more involved in science and understand science and make what they were doing more compatible with science. And Cantor was really beat up with his peer review, but Cantor related to his work with God because, again, he was a Christian. In fact, Cantor said the transfinite species, now what this means is these numbers of infinity and bigger numbers. He called them transfinite. Trans means beyond, I guess. Beyond finite. He says the transfinite species are just as much at the disposal of the intentions of the Creator in his absolute boundless and his absolute boundless will, as are the finite numbers. Because God is greater than anything we can imagine. So, can God exist in a 5 billionth dimension? Yeah. Can he exist in an Aleph naught dimension? Can he exist in a bigger dimension? And there is no biggest. And it's totally beyond our comprehension. So here we are as finite beings trying to look through a glass darkly, trying to understand how great God is. But if God is greater than all this, in terms of dimensions, in terms of infinities, it really shows how great our God is. So that's the reason that I say math, and this is kind of math at hopefully kind of an understandable level. It exposes God. because he screwed it up. It's just mind-boggling. So. But that's it. So we had 2 talks, one on evolution, the other one on infinity and other things.